And just to be clear to our listeners, you just alluded to it, but I want to sharpen it. How are you going to measure access and outcomes? Because as you know, that's something that higher ed has found lots of ways of resisting over the years, because frankly, there are many ways to measure both of those things. And the data has been historically difficult to gather, at least in reliable ways across all student populations. Context is different in different parts of the country. And at least I'm guessing you sort of don't want to create this zero sum mentality about, moving some tiers of students up at the expense of others, I suppose. So, nor do you want them to cream students, I imagine. So
Right.
how are you navigating all that as you think about access and outcomes?
Yeah, it's such a you put your finger on the sort of stream of conversation that we've been having for the last 3 years. We put together a technical review panel of 20 sort of experts in economists, data scientists, and others that have been really thinking about broadly access and earnings. And several of them have put together their own sort of ranking systems of some sort. I think one of the big things that came out, Michael, is context really matters and geography matters a ton, right? An institution that is in rural Idaho is different than an institution that is, based in Miami, Florida. And so, I think we learned very early that doing the right amounts of sort of geographical context is going to be incredibly important. So let me just note, I mean, to answer sort of the pointy end of the question, we're measuring outcomes by earnings, and we are measuring earnings 8 years after attendance for all federally aided students. So not just students who've completed, but all students. If the student shows up, we'll count them. That'll be true both for first-time students, but also, students who've transferred in or who've stopped out and have come back. All students that are federally aided will look at their earnings 8 years after attendance. We could have looked at 6 years. We could have looked at 10 years. I think we've been playing with those sorts of nuances for a little bit, but we were pretty clear that we wanted to measure all students. On access, lots of ways to measure access. The data, as you allude to, is not perfect. There are lots of things that we would love to be able to capture if we could, things like first generation status. But what we are measuring, at least in this first instance, is percent Pell relative to the location of where your students are coming from, and percent underrepresented minority, again, relative to where your students are coming from. So both those are really, the relative to where your students are coming from is very important because, again, the possible, if you're a community college in Arkansas, you might have access to sort of a different population than a community college that's in Austin, Texas. So we knew that was going to be really important to us. The earnings, by the way, will also end up being adjusted for